Said before, you felt like they liked the attention, they liked when they had to fight over them.
Oh, they love the fighting. They love the competition between the women.
Do you think it's like that with all polygamous men?
Majority of the ones that I've been around, and I've been around hundreds of them, yes, they use it to control the women.
It was the moment no one saw coming. Janelle Brown, usually calm, balanced, and thoughtful, suddenly spoke out. And what she said about Christine's husband, David Woolley, sent shockwaves through the Sister Wives community. Fans who have followed Janelle for years were stunned, not because she finally spoke her mind, but because of what she accused David of, spreading what she called dangerous views. That one word, dangerous, changed everything. For so long, viewers had watched Janelle hold her peace, even when tension brewed between her and Christine after their lives took drastically different turns. But in this shocking new moment, Janelle seemed to draw a line in the sand, challenging the man who's become Christine's symbol of freedom after escaping polygamy. Hey everyone, I'm Sarah, and welcome back to Sister Wives Chapter and Reality Scandals Daily. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button and join our family of truth seekers who love going behind the scenes of TLC's most dramatic stories. And I want to hear from you. What do you think about Janelle's reaction? Do you believe she's right to call David out? Or has the pain of the past just gone too deep? Comment below. Your thoughts always add so much insight to these conversations. Now, let's get into the heart of it, because this isn't just about one argument or one interview. It's about a deeper, harder truth that Sister Wives has been circling for years. The clash between loyalty to the world they once lived in and the courage it takes to face how much control, manipulation, and emotional harm that world truly caused. Janelle's words didn't just spark headlines, they reopened old wounds. Behind her calm tone was something raw and personal, something fans could feel. It wasn't just about David. It was about what happens when people finally walk away from a system that once defined their entire identity, and then see someone else proudly exposing the cracks in it. And that's where everything in this story begins to unravel. With truth, pain, and a fight over who really gets to define what dangerous means. When Christine Brown found love again with David Woolley, it wasn't just a new chapter in her personal story. It was a full-blown turning point for the entire Brown family. Fans who had watched the Sister Wives journey from the very beginning could feel that shift immediately. Christine's smile was different. Her tone, her energy, everything about her radiated freedom. After years of heartbreak and emotional neglect in her marriage to Cody, she had finally stepped out of a system that once defined her life and found something that looked and felt real. But for the rest of the family, especially Janelle, that freedom came with confusion, maybe even a quiet kind of pain. Christine's marriage to David didn't just represent love after loss. It became a symbol of rebellion against everything the Browns once believed in. The entire premise of Sister Wives had always revolved around one thing: faith in a lifestyle that many outside the family saw as restrictive, but which they had called sacred. For decades, polygamy wasn't just a choice, it was their identity, their purpose, their proof of devotion. And then Christine broke away from it, publicly, proudly, and without looking back. When she and David started sharing their life online, their road trips, their laughter, their genuine affection, it wasn't just content for fans, it was a statement. Here was Christine, the same woman who once spoke about spiritual marriage and sister-wife bonds, now standing beside a man who had openly rejected that entire belief system. David wasn't just another husband. He was a man unafraid to speak against the very idea of polygamy. In one of the most talked-about episodes, Janelle made it clear that while she had emotionally separated from Cody, she still carried a quiet respect for the faith structure that had built their family. She defended Cody's principles long after others had moved on, often saying that their shared faith had once brought meaning and unity. When Christine began voicing how toxic that dynamic had become, Janelle didn't argue, but you could see the conflict on her face. She was torn between understanding Christine's pain and holding on to the belief that their plural marriage hadn't been all bad. For Janelle, Loyalty wasn't about Cody anymore. It was about not letting go of something she had spent her entire adult life believing in. She had built her identity inside that world. Even when she moved into her own RV and started building her own independence, she never outright rejected polygamy. To her, it wasn't black and white. But then came David. David Woolley wasn't just a man who loved Christine. He became her partner in healing. Fans saw in him a protective, grounded energy that Christine had never experienced in her old life. He didn't need to be in control. He didn't demand obedience. Instead, he encouraged her to laugh, to speak freely, to live without fear. That was powerful, but it also put him directly in the line of fire. Because with every photo, every caption, every loving comment, David was sending a message that polygamy had damaged Christine deeply and that she deserved better. That message didn't sit well with everyone, especially Janelle. From her point of view, David's voice carried an edge that felt personal. To Janelle, it might have sounded less like support and more like accusation, not just against Cody, but against everyone who once believed in that system. When David started referring to his and Christine's life as healthy and equal, the unspoken contrast hit hard. It was as if he was saying that everything before him, everything the Browns once stood for, was broken. But here's what gave David's words weight. He wasn't a stranger to struggle or loss. Before meeting Christine, he'd lived through grief, raised children on his own, and built a quiet, grounded life far from television cameras. His rejection of polygamy didn't come from ignorance. It came from observation. He'd seen how control and religious fear could twist relationships. He'd watched Christine find her strength again, and he refused to let anyone pull her back into the mindset that once broke her spirit. That's what made this clash so emotional. Because while Christine was celebrating her freedom, Janelle was still standing in that gray area between past and present. She wasn't angry, but she couldn't fully join Christine in condemning everything they had once called sacred either. Fans could feel her struggle. A woman who wanted peace, who wanted to support her friend, but who also couldn't erase years of belief overnight. It's heartbreaking when two people who once shared the same faith and family bond suddenly find themselves on opposite sides of truth. Christine's joy became a mirror for Janelle, showing her what healing looks like, but also forcing her to question what she still believes. And that's where the quiet tension began to grow. Behind every public smile and social media post, there was a lingering divide. Christine had found her way out of the old structure. David had given her a new foundation built on choice, not obligation. But Janelle? She was still holding the pieces, trying to decide what to let go of, and what was still worth defending. When David Woolley finally spoke his truth about polygamy, it wasn't in anger. It was in clarity. He didn't rant or mock. He simply said what so many outsiders have quietly thought for years, that polygamy gives men a built-in system of control over women. To him, it wasn't spiritual. It was structural. And he believed that Christine, like so many others, had suffered under it. Fans remember the interview and social media moments where David said he'd never understood how one man could claim to lead multiple women and call that love. He spoke softly, but his message hit like thunder. For Christine, his words were liberating. For Janelle, they were like a slap. Because for her, it wasn't just a comment. It was an attack on a life she had lived, defended, and at one point deeply believed in. When Janelle reportedly called David's opinions dangerous, it revealed a lot more than disagreement. It showed fear. Fear of losing the foundation she had spent decades building her identity on. Janelle has always been one of the most logical, steady voices in the Brown family. Viewers have often said she was the glue, the one who managed to keep perspective when the emotional storms hit. But when it comes to faith and family, she's also deeply loyal. To Janelle, the principle of plural marriage was never about control or power. It was about choice, community, and faith. It was her way of believing that love could exist in a bigger, more complicated form. So when David openly rejected everything polygamy represented, it struck a nerve. He wasn't just disagreeing. He was shining a light on the parts of that lifestyle that Janelle had spent years rationalizing. By calling his words dangerous, she wasn't necessarily defending control. She was defending meaning. Because if David was right, if the system really was built to control women, then everything she had sacrificed, Everything she had justified would suddenly feel like a lie. That's an unbearable thought for anyone who's built their whole life around faith. Think back to those scenes with Janelle and Cody in the later seasons. Remember the moment when she stood in the middle of that snowy Flagstaff land, frustrated and alone, trying to make sense of why her family's dreams were crumbling. She had believed so deeply in the idea of unity, of one family sharing love and resources under a single faith, but it kept falling apart in front of her eyes. When she tried to reason with Cody about fairness, about spending time with the wives equally, his responses were often defensive, dismissive, or controlling. That's when fans started to see the cracks in Janelle's loyalty. She wasn't blind. She saw the imbalance. She lived it. Yet, even in those painful moments, when she packed up her RV, when she admitted she was spiritually separated from Cody, she didn't lash out against the faith itself. She blamed the individuals, not the belief. That's why David's words cut so deep. Because he wasn't separating the two. To him, the structure was the problem. For Janelle, that sounded like blasphemy. Her entire adult life had been shaped by this principle, the same one she'd once explained to her children as an act of obedience to God. Even after she found independence, she didn't want to condemn the foundation that had raised her kids and given her purpose. To do so would mean admitting that much of her life was spent under a system that didn't value her equally, and that's a truth she wasn't ready to face, not yet. Meanwhile, David's stance came from love, not judgment. He had seen Christine's pain. He had listened to her talk about years of feeling unseen, of constantly having to share her husband's affection, and of the guilt that came with wanting more. His perspective wasn't born from religion. It came from empathy. From the outside looking in, he saw a system that demanded silence and sacrifice from women, while giving men spiritual authority to decide what was right. He wasn't trying to pick a fight. He was protecting the woman he loved from the same pattern that once broke her. That's what makes this conflict so heartbreaking. Both sides believe they're standing for truth. Janelle thinks David's words could destroy the faith community that once gave her strength. David believes his truth could save others from pain. They're both trying to protect something sacred, just from opposite directions. You can see it in Janelle's eyes during those emotional confessionals, that quiet ache of someone caught between two worlds. She's seen the control, the tears, the loneliness. She's lived through Cody's favoritism, through years of putting family harmony above her own needs. Yet she still can't bring herself to say that the system itself was wrong. Because if she says that, then where does she belong? It's not stubbornness, it's survival. And maybe that's what dangerous really meant. Not that David's words were false, but that they threatened the fragile balance she was trying to hold. They forced her to look at memories she wasn't ready to process, the moments when her own faith justified her pain. Fans who have followed this story know there's no simple right or wrong here. David's truth is honest. Janelle's fear is real. One is fighting for healing. The other is fighting to keep meaning alive. And in that quiet tension, we see the human cost of walking away from a belief that once promised eternal happiness, only to find that freedom, too, comes with its own heartbreak. When you look back at all the seasons of Sister Wives, one pattern becomes impossible to ignore: control. Not the loud kind, but the quiet, spiritual kind that seeps into every part of a relationship. The Brown family's story, at its heart, has always been about faith colliding with human emotion. What started as a promise of shared love and divine purpose slowly began to show cracks. And in those cracks, viewers saw something that looked a lot more like power than partnership. Cody Brown's role as the spiritual head of the family was meant to be about guidance and unity. But over time, it turned into authority. And often, that authority came with favoritism. We saw it play out again and again on screen. In those later seasons, Cody's connection with Robin stood out, while his relationships with Christine, Janelle, and Mary unraveled. Fans remember the moments where Cody justified his distance, calling it respecting their choices. But to many, it looked like punishment. He withheld affection, attention, and even emotional support when the wives didn't follow his version of obedience. That's what David meant when he said polygamy gives men control. It wasn't about Cody being a villain. It was about how the structure itself allowed him to make decisions that always tilted in his favor. Under the belief that he was spiritually ordained, Cody could frame control as leadership. When he said things like, "I'm the head of this family," it wasn't just a statement. It was a reminder of where power lived. Christine eventually saw it. You could watch her realization happen across several seasons. That slow, painful awareness that no matter how much she gave, she would never truly be seen as equal. One of the most gut-wrenching scenes came when she confronted Cody about intimacy and emotional connection. He brushed her off, saying he no longer felt safe with her, as if her feelings were a threat instead of a plea. That moment changed everything. It wasn't just rejection, it was revelation. Christine finally understood that staying meant losing herself. When she walked away, it wasn't rebellion, it was survival. And the joy that came after, the laughter, the confidence, the love with David, became the proof of how heavy that control had been. For Christine, freedom wasn't about hating her past, it was about reclaiming her worth. She could finally breathe without someone defining her value through obedience or sacrifice. But for Janelle, it wasn't that simple. She saw what Christine did and even supported her in finding happiness, but part of her still couldn't detach faith from identity. Janelle's loyalty wasn't to Cody's authority anymore. It was to the idea that her years in plural marriage still meant something. To her, leaving didn't feel like freedom.
It felt like erasing the faith that had shaped her children's lives. That's the tragedy so many viewers empathize with. For women like Janelle, faith and family are intertwined. To reject one feels like betraying both. It's not weakness, it's heartbreak. Because even when she saw how the system empowered Cody to dominate emotionally and spiritually, she couldn't fully denounce it. It had been her home, her foundation, her way of believing that love could still be holy, even when it hurt. So, while Christine's exit looked like liberation, Janelle's hesitation looked like mourning. One woman found freedom in truth, the other clung to meaning in memory. And that's the cruel paradox of polygamy as Sister Wives exposed it. A system built on faith but sustained by control. The wives were told to love each other, to share, to obey, and to trust that their sacrifice was sacred. But over time, the sacrifices only went one way. The women gave, and the man decided when they'd given enough. That's what makes the Brown family's story so powerful and painful to watch. It's not just a story of broken marriages. It's a story of women trying to reclaim power in a world that told them power wasn't theirs to hold. And now, years later, we're watching those same women, Christine, Janelle, and even Mary, standing in different stages of awakening, each defining faith and freedom for themselves. Christine chose to walk away from control. Janelle chose to redefine what faith means to her. And somewhere in that contrast, the real truth of Sister Wives lives, that control may have built their story, but courage is what's rewriting it. When Janelle's dangerous comment hit social media, the fandom split right down the middle. Some fans stood firmly with David, saying he was finally saying what needed to be said, that the truth about polygamy wasn't cruel, it was overdue. Others, though, rushed to defend Janelle, calling her reaction understandable, even heartbreaking. In one sentence, Janelle had reopened every old wound the Brown family had spent years trying to heal. Across TikTok, Reddit, and fan forums, the debate exploded. One Reddit user wrote, "David's not dangerous, he's honest. What's dangerous is pretending polygamy didn't hurt these women." Another countered, "Janelle's not wrong. When someone calls your entire life structure toxic, that's going to feel like an attack. She's protecting what gave her meaning." And that's exactly what made this moment so complicated. Nobody was entirely right, and nobody was entirely wrong. For longtime viewers, this wasn't just about a disagreement. It was about identity. The Brown family had invited the world into their homes for over a decade, showing what plural marriage looked like behind closed doors. Fans had watched births, weddings, heartbreaks, and betrayals. They'd seen Christine's tears when Cody ignored her. They'd seen Janelle quietly shoulder the weight of responsibility when things fell apart. They'd seen Mary crumble under isolation. Every emotion, every confession had been public.
So when David came in with a fresh outsider voice, challenging the very belief system that held the family together, it felt like the final confrontation viewers had been waiting for. Many praised David for standing by Christine without fear. Under one of Christine's Instagram posts showing them hiking together, a fan commented, "He's the first man who treats her like an equal, not a follower." Another wrote, "This is what real partnership looks like: freedom, respect, and love without control." It was clear that for a large portion of the audience, David had become a symbol of healing, of what love can look like when it isn't filtered through spiritual hierarchy. But for others, especially those who had once admired Janelle's composure, the situation was more nuanced. On X, formerly Twitter, fans wrote messages like, "I get where Janelle's coming from. She spent decades building her faith around this system. You don't just throw that away overnight." One comment summed it up perfectly. "Janelle's heart is free, but her soul is still catching up." And that's exactly what we see in her. Janelle's conflict isn't about jealousy or resentment toward Christine. It's about the terrifying process of rethinking your entire life. For years, she had told herself that plural marriage was her calling, her sacrifice for eternal reward. To admit it was broken means admitting she lived under a belief that hurt her, and that's not something anyone accepts easily. When fans rewatched scenes of Janelle defending Cody's authority or trying to hold the family together even as he drifted toward Robin, they started to understand her perspective more deeply. She wasn't blind. She was loyal. Her entire identity was built on harmony and faith. She believed that if she stayed calm and patient, things would eventually make sense. But they didn't. And now, David's words were forcing her to see what patience had cost her. Meanwhile, Christine stayed silent through most of the storm. That silence spoke volumes. She didn't lash out at Janelle. She didn't try to defend David. Instead, she kept sharing quiet glimpses of her new life, cooking in her kitchen, traveling with David, laughing with her kids. That calmness became its own kind of message. Fans called it strength. It showed that Christine didn't need to argue anymore. Her happiness was proof enough. Even as viewers argued online, one thing united them: empathy. Everyone could feel that this wasn't just family drama. It was generational pain unfolding in real time. The Brown family's story had become a mirror for anyone who's ever questioned a belief system they were raised in, anyone who's ever felt torn between loyalty and freedom. By the time the dust began to settle, the dangerous comment had taken on a new meaning. It wasn't just about David's views. It was about the fear that comes when truth threatens comfort. Janelle wasn't trying to silence David. She was trying to protect herself from everything his words made her feel. Because deep down, maybe she knew he wasn't wrong. And that's what fans couldn't stop talking about. The Sister Wives audience has always been sharp. They read body language, remember past confessionals, and connect dots the show barely hints at. They noticed how Janelle's eyes softened whenever she talked about Christine's happiness, even if she didn't agree with David. They noticed how, in her own quiet way, she was starting to question everything too. The comment sections turned into confession booths. People shared their own experiences leaving strict faiths, marriages, or communities. They said they understood Janelle's fear, because letting go of what once gave you purpose can feel like stepping into nothingness. Others said Christine's courage gave them hope, that it's never too late to start again. By the end, the fandom's reaction said more about the Brown family's impact than anything else. Through all the chaos, fans weren't just watching a reality show. They were watching women rewrite their lives in real time. Christine found peace. Janelle found her voice. And even as their paths divided, the world couldn't look away. Because this wasn't just another fight in the Sister Wives universe. It was the moment the truth stopped being whispered and started being lived. And every viewer could feel it, deep down, in their own version of what dangerous means. In the end, this clash between David, Christine, and Janelle wasn't just about a disagreement. It was about breaking generations of control, faith, and fear. For years, the Brown family's story has been a study in loyalty. Loyalty to belief, to marriage, and to a system that promised unity but often delivered pain. What we've seen now is something far more powerful. the moment when love and truth finally stood up to control. Christine's courage to walk away from a faith structure that no longer served her wasn't rebellion. It was rebirth. And when David spoke out, calling polygamy a system that gives men power over women, he didn't just challenge Cody or the Browns. He challenged the foundation of everything they once believed. That kind of truth doesn't come without consequences, but it also doesn't come without freedom. Together, Christine and David have shown that real faith isn't about submission. It's about honesty, compassion, and equality. But then there's Janelle, the heart of quiet endurance. Her struggle reminds us that walking away isn't easy when your entire identity is built around belief. Indoctrination doesn't disappear overnight. Even when you see the cracks in the system, your heart clings to what once gave you purpose. That's not weakness, it's humanity. And maybe that's why so many people still root for Janelle, because they see their own fear, their own hesitation, reflected in her. This moment, this confrontation, isn't the end of the sister-wives story. It's a turning point. It forces every viewer to ask the same haunting question. When truth and tradition collide, which one do we protect? So we'll leave you with this. Do you think Janelle will ever see David's truth? Or is her loyalty to the past too deep to break? Tell us what you believe in the comments below. And if you want to keep uncovering the untold truths behind the Brown family, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share. Because sometimes, the most dangerous truth is the one we're finally ready to face.